Next presentation is by Venerable Professor Digalle Mahinda Thero on Sri Lanka's preoccupations with the Tripitaka, ancient and modern contributions to the preservation and understanding of Buddha Vachana, the word of the Buddha. Professor Venerable Digalle Mahinda Thero teaches at the Bath Spa University. He is a graduate of the University of Peradeniya, Harvard University, and the University of Chicago. I think you earned your bachelor's degree from Peradeniya and master's from Harvard and PhD from the University of Chicago. So he has taught in Canada, USA, and Sri Lanka and conducted postdoctoral research in Japan. He is the author of Popularized in Buddhism, published in 2006, and editor of several volumes, including Justice and Statecraft, published in 2017, and Buddhism, Conflict and Violence in Modern Sri Lanka, published in 2006. Venerable Sir, we now respectfully call upon you to do a presentation. Thank you.
Dear Venerable monks, in particular Venerable Sila Vimala and Her Excellency Manisha Gunasekara, the Sri Lankan High Commissioner, and Your Excellencies from Thailand, Myanmar, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and the devotees of London Buddhist Vihara, and dear friends. So I was asked by Venerable Sila Vimala to talk about Sri Lanka's contribution to Tripitaka. And so that's why I use this word called Sri Lankan preoccupations. And I think President's declaration of the week, Tripitaka as a national treasure, but also his ambition to register it UNESCO, and also this week, I think, represents this continuation of these preoccupations. And I think Professor Getin's talk earlier is very helpful for me to elaborate some of the Sri Lankan contributions. So we know that there is a self-perception. Sri Lanka has a self-perception that it is the home of the Theravada Buddhism. And that directly relates to the Tripitaka. Without Tripitaka, probably this understanding will not come. And then I think we are kind of concerned about this Buddha Vachana, the word of the Buddha. And that's where, at least, we heard from Professor Getin, complexity of how we can get to the word of the Buddha. But nevertheless, there is a perception that Sri Lanka has, if not all, significant portion of that in Pali language. So that's quite interesting. So it was unofficial national heritage, but since January 5th this year, it has kind of a state recognition as a valuable collection. So I think it's quite important to understand this preoccupation. Now, my question is, some of the questions that I ask here can provoke some of you, but if it does, you have to listen to Elizabeth Harris about anger and so on. Yeah. Now we have to ask why is it necessary? Why it made Professor Sirisena to declare it national treasure? I have some answers. They are not complete, but I think one of the things is this traditional preoccupation has been challenged in recent years. I mean, it has been challenged 20 centuries, but especially last 10 years, it has been, or 10, 15 years, it has been challenged. And it has to do with Sinhala people and who claim to be Buddhist and their misinterpretation of the Tripitaka. And also, individuals mentioned, these are only 3 examples, individuals like this, that's mentioned here, their idiosyncratic translation of the Buddha's word, saying that one individual can translate this canon completely. I think it goes to Professor Ketin's complex lecture about these various languages and so on. So these are 2 important occasions. And the third one, activist group, there are several, I'm not going to name them because this is a state-sponsored activity, High Commission, so I am not mention them, but there is activist demand that there is a constitutional obligation of the state to protect Buddhism, so the Tripitaka should be protected. And I think these are the 3 reasons I see. You may find some more. So now, these are, I think, from Professor Ketin we got some. The most important our achievements are at least recording the Tripitaka in palm leaves. And I would say, like the digital text that we have today, this is the first occasion, if not Ashoka, but after that first time, technology is used to preserve Buddhism, preserve Buddha's word, freeze the text, and make it think about this memory is problematic and wanted to preserve. So first occasion. So in that respect, it is very important, this writing in Matale. And then the commentaries, the monks who came from South India, like Buddha Gosa and so on, they wanted to produce an authentic interpretation. And that's very important, the Attakathas. And then many sub-commentaries, not still available even in Sinhala, let alone English, So these 3, I think we have to use all 3 in order to get to Buddha's words, because there is a traditional method of interpretation. And then the last one, we have completely neglected this portion of literature, which we call Banakatha literature or medieval literature, Pujavali and so on. That's also extension of the Pali canon, and that also need to be taken into account. And the last one is this. Palm leaf collections. I think Professor Ketin mentioned about the problematic of PTS editions and the critical editions and so on. These palm leaf manuscripts, important part of it, and I think we have to take that on board to do the good job, real job. So few things, Tripitaka recitation. These are some of the, the Sri Lankans. Of course, it's generalization, but in general, having interest in what the Buddha taught. Buddha's word was an important one. So they would go to any length to clarify the point of view. So now we know that it was clarified in the first council. We hear the 3 councils held in India. And then significant transition. The text which were bhanakas and oral tradition suddenly put into written form. And this is applying technology. Why we have to think about only the computers and the digital media. But if you think about how the palm leaves are produced and how they can be kept for more than several hundred years, there is serious technology there. And we should exploit more, I think. So here what I mean is these, in Sri Lanka, these traditional Bhanaka system completely transformed, and I think we haven't explored it fully yet. I mean, we rely on Adhikaram, written in 1940s. We haven't gone beyond that. I think that should be studied more. Now, writing text in Aluvihara, and now here, it's a tradition that we got from India, the oral tradition, and it was transformed, and we know that it was in the second reign of King Vattagamini. And what is important to recognize is a politically unstable situation, and the monastic community itself faced problems, and the famine, migration, and challenges of memorization, ability to retain the text, and all of that went into this important achievement, but serious problem. Our chronicles, both Deepavansa and Mahavansa, have only 2 verses. Such a significant event is reduced into 2 verses, whereas Duttagamini is given more than 18 chapters, and Tripitaka canon has only 2 verses. And now these are the 2 verses, in Pali, in this section in Deepavansa. And I will use the English translation for people to understand. Now, here it says that in a former times it kept orally, but because people are falling away, and now the bhikkhus got together, and in order to preserve for longer period, it was put down to writing. That's all. So this important, even what we call a national treasure, is reduced into 4 lines. We have to think about why. What are the politics of that? What is that agenda? We have to raise those issues, I think. And then writing down here, like Professor Gethin, one of these things is that a lot of manuscripts were destroyed. Now there is a serious question. Some people did not return to Sri Lanka, so some of the texts may have here missed. But also, is it identical? What we have, is it identical? What we have today, is it identical? Some people suggest it's unlikely. I mean, it's up to you to decide, but a lot of research has to be done. So now Pali commentary is another layer. It's a very important one. I think we have Pali Text Society done a lot of work, but Sri Lanka has also done a lot of work. This is a very important one. Now, this is important also. Like the 2 verses in the Deepavansa and Mahavansa, recently, the location of the writing in Matali has been contested. This is a book just came out 2002. Matali Aluvihari, the Tripitaka Gantaruda Nokkalai Wagai. The texts were not written down in Matali. This is something for us to think about. So the people are questioning, those issues. Quite important to consider. Now, Tripitaka recitation, another many contributions. Now here in Sri Lanka, this is in Palmadulla. They had the 1865. This is the location that they had the Sanghayana. And this happened in 1865 during the British colonial time, important event. And not entire Tripitaka was recited, but important thing is that Sripada became very important after this event. The head monk was Venerable Sumangala, and he was appointed as the chief priest of Sri Lanka and Adams Peak, and then Protestant Buddhism at Gombrich, and basically called Protestant Buddhism. Very important layer, event happening with Tripitaka recitation, and the politics of the Sangha, the power, changed drastically, and also British involvement in it. And then this is the kind of Theravada in that place. Still you can see it, very exquisite, you can see where the Sanghayana was held. Yeah, it's in Palmadul. And then recently in Kalaniya, where the Vidyalankara Pirivana was, in 1959-53 there was a Sanghayana. Of course, there are criticism that they did not publish the text, but very important. And this was just before the Buddha Jayanti. And then the government took over the task of printing the text in 1955. So this, I think, paved the way for the other awareness among the Sinhalese Buddhists that we should do something. Very important. And then, this very briefly I wanted to go. I think we went to it. There's a broader perspective on the canons. We can say that we have authority scriptures. And this is the kind of, we can see the samples here, assuming that we don't have it, I brought it, but you have a physical one, you can come and touch later, get inspiration. And then the Chinese tradition, I think we heard it from our ambassador, Mrs. Gunasekara, about this Heiansa, very important. These are the plates, and now we call it Taiso Tripitaka, the Japanese edition. It was printed in Japan, but it's based on the Korean, these ones, the first printing of the text in China was the Tripitaka. It's a very important one. So this is the kind of the Korean one, but Korea, Japanese, and Chinese. And then the Tibetan one, we can see somewhat similar to ours, the way the manuscripts are placed, and you can see very colorful and beautiful, you know. Now, colonial context, I mean, we cannot forget this, because that we were under the British, and also we were benefited, but also has some disadvantages. But one of the important things is that during this period, 1815 to 1948 and afterwards, there was a lot of people, like including Elizabeth, you know, a lot of scholars came and wrote. Like these are few individuals who worked on. These are not, none of them are Buddhist, you know, Gogerly, Copleston, and Hardy. And they wrote a lot about, educated about the canon and so on in the West. And then Pali translation, maybe this is the most important one, broadly, Pali Text Society. And I think it is nice to talk this in the presence of Professor Gethin, who is the president of the Pali Text Society. I have some suggestions after this. And now we know that Rhys Davies, you know, who spent critical period, 8 years in Sri Lanka, learning Pali from the monks, and you know, he came later on, he became the professor in Manchester and founded Pali Text Society. And now we are nearing 200 years anniversary. And I think the critical edition that Rupert mentioned, I think we can talk about in relation to that. And now here, enormous power, Pali Text Society is a part of the colonial machine, if not formally, informally. And why it is the case is this. This is actually Sri Lankan gratitude for this honorable gentleman, Rhys Davies. And when this anniversary, the stamp was issued in honor of Rhys Davies, you know. And now this is the most important quote. You know, Philip Almond Wright in 1888, you know, by middle of the 19th century, the Buddhism that exists out there in Asia was beginning to be judged by a West that alone knew Buddhism was in the past, what Buddhism is in the present, and what ought to be Buddhism forever. Yeah? The essence of Buddhism came to be seen expressed not out there in the Orient, but in the West, through the West control of Buddhism's own textual past. So here it's very interesting, you know, Pali Text Society and its role, both for the Western educators, but also the elite in Sri Lanka, you know. So this is quite interesting. And now here, I think Rupert mentioned few of them. Sri Lanka Tripitaka project, there are several, very important one. And this is the very important couple, and I have the photo there, that side in this temple. This lady is quite important, you know. She became widow, you know, Somavati, and her husband passed away when was very young, and they started this publishing commentaries, and she gave her whole estate after her death to publish it, and we have those texts there in the library. Very important, kind of bringing Attakatha. Now here the point is, they were not thinking about Sinhala, they were thinking about Pali. That's something we have to remember. Yeah, and then these are those texts, yeah. And now here it started 1917, and by 1959 they finished 49 volumes. What a commitment! And then this one, a lot of criticism because it was done by the government. But some people who are very careless, they say it's pedantic, archaic, and so on. It looks like nonsense, because what the problem is, our education system do not educate our people in the language. The Sinhala language, students should be given whole range of Sinhala lessons, not only colloquial Sinhala. So they cannot read this text because they are not educated in Sinhala, and that's the problem. So, but anyway, the important thing is this volume. You know, about 57 volumes. They are also there, and they are. It's a slow project. 55 to 1989, and this will be very important for Professor Gethin and his project of critical editions. Why I say this? This text, on the left-hand side we have the Pali text, on the right hand it has the Sinhala translation, and not only that, it uses much more whole range of manuscripts which Rhys Davies and others did not have access in 1888 or until 1920. So I think there is a gap to be filled in consultation with these Sinhala translation. I think there's a lot of merit in this text for our study of Tripitaka. And this is the kind of volume 4, kind of composed by, for example, this is my transliteration. I just kind of had fun one day when I was traveling. Now I want to read this one. Isamehi bhagyavat budurajanan vahanse සැවත් නුවර ජේතවනයෝ අනේපිඩු සිටුගේ ආරාමේ වැඩවසන සේක. That's the beginning. And people say it is archaic and pedantic. There's nothing pedantic about it, nothing archaic about it. It's just good Sinhala. And it's silly that people say they can't understand it. It's nonsense. That what happening is that we have not been educated people in the Sinhala language. And this translation is very civilized, very refined Sinhala. And I think we should pay more attention to this translation. And also on the bottom there are a lot of footnotes and the manuscripts and so on, very valuable when we come to the PTS edition revision someday to use this one. I think it has gone a step further than what we have done, I think. And then this one people do not know. A man single-handedly, actually he was here when this temple was founded, 1829. He was student when the temple was founded. A.P.D. Soisa single-handedly translated the entire Tripitaka into Sinhala. Very beautiful Sinhala that people can understand, and people do not recognize it. It's unfortunate. Another opportunity for the Palitic Society. 48 volumes single-handedly, recently printed, and it includes commentaries also. 38 volumes, the canon, and the remaining are the commentaries. And he died in 1968. Now, before the government printing, he finished the whole thing single-handedly. Remarkable individuals, what individuals can do. And then this is kind of the Visuddhimagga, the beginning point. How in the Pilis in the Nuanen Nuanati, Kelestavana Viriati, Pariharika Nuanen Nuanati, Sasarabidu to Yamek Attid. So kind of translate the first verse of the Visuddhimagga. Very beautiful Sinhalese, it's a very, very nice one. And then Pali commentaries in Sinhala, recently commentaries have been translated by the Cultural Center. And I think this will be very valuable for our Pali studies to take on board. I think there are an English edition, and I think it's very, very valuable. Then palm leaf collections. Colombo Museum has the largest collection, untouched. There are dust in the manuscripts, over 5,000 manuscripts. And then University of Peradeniya have over nearly 4,000 manuscripts. And then this is the University of Peradeniya. And then this temple, Hanguranketa, older temple, individual monk started, and it has the third largest one, and a lot of manuscripts, and it doesn't have even a catalog, let alone to read the manuscripts. I mean, these are only few, and I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of Tripitaka treasures, And in overseas collection, it has been overlooked. Hugh Neville, a British young man, 17 years old, goes to Sri Lanka and beaten up, come back and die in France. Collected nearly 2,000 manuscripts, and the British Library purchased them. And there are Sinhalese manuscripts, all aspects of Sinhala culture, but also Pali manuscripts, untouched. This is the area that we have to work on. This is the catalog. They have 9 catalog, handmade catalog. These are 2 volumes, kind of like the name only, 2 volumes. Yeah, and then British Library has a lot of good ones. This is ivory. Visuddhimagga, I think it's a Visuddhimagga. I think I just saw the manuscript, ivory carving and so on. These are called Kamba. It's a very important one. This is the text, how beautiful it is. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa sile patittaya narosa panyo chittam panyancha bhave, kind of beginning point of Visuddhimagga. Very beautifully decorated manuscript. And now look at inside. The 16 places of pilgrimage, very beautifully. This Tissa Mahavihara, Bodhi, Mirisavati, Swannamali, and so on, kind of very nicely decorated. And now, Sripada, how the Sripada was seen. And then the kind of changes on writing. Look at how the Mahayangana is written, the way it is written. This is not the way we write. some of the interesting things we have to understand, and I think quite interesting. And this it is interesting here. The date is given in the manuscript, 1853. So that's the time that Hirunivil was in Sri Lanka. And so, concluding thoughts: significant preoccupation is visible. Is central to the imagination as well as the practice, both monks and the lay people. However, in the tradition, there is a reluctance to edit the text as well as, in particular, to translate. And I think the British scholars did it, like Rich Davis, because they were adamant about it, they published it, but I think some of the, probably hindsight, I think they didn't want it to be edited. And the reluctance is very visible. Now, quite late in terms of us, printed edition, this is applied to Sri Lanka, but also Thailand and Burma. This reluctance is there, because none of those countries have a Thai or Burmese edition, translation of those texts. So project is not complete yet. And now, Palm Leaves, we have substantial work in terms of translation. And we have to plan many unedited Palm Leaves manuscripts in temple libraries. We need systematic catalogs, on this one. Virtually no catalog at all about Buddhist temple life. Somadasa has brief one, but just the title only, but no detailed catalog. How we can study Buddhism when we don't have even a catalog of our resources? We are making joke of ourselves, We are not really doing our business. And now, challenges ahead. 200 years come in PTS society, so I think we have to prepare it. We have to look at the Sri Lankan editions, translation of the canon, commentaries, sub-commentaries, and I think PTS project has I recognize PTS volume has a value, but it needs to be enriched by the Sri Lankan tradition, the translation, and so on in the next 60 years to be viable. I think it's a great challenge for Professor Getin, but I think I believe that you may do something for us. And Hugh Neville collection, very important one. We have to do it. And this reluctance is gone in Siam also. Do not want to translate the text. It's a disaster. Now I have few questions here. Sri Lankan government should think about how we teach Sinhala in the schools. In particular, variety of reading that we give to students is very important. And I think it's very clearly when we think about study of Buddhism. I mean, making national literacy is good, but I think we have to have a good way of teaching Sinhala to kids. Very important. Now, Sinhala was not considered important until 1940s and 1950s. That's why the texts were not translated. I mean, look, our pioneer, Anagarika Dharmapala, he's silent. He talks about Sinhala people, but he's silent on the printing of the canon and translation. And he was pulled only at the very last minute, last 4 years in his life, to be the advisor to the Simon Heva Vitarana bequest, because the person who was in charge died. Yeah? So I wonder why Anagarika Dharmapala was silent. Somebody should research why he was not interested in putting the Tripitaka into Sinhala. Something for us to think about. And think about other great Buddhists. Hikkaduwe Sumangala, Migettuwatte Gunananda, Alcott. All of them have ignored Sinhala. Why? What's the reason? We have to ask all of this. Positive note, the first century before the Christ, we give a very interesting case that Sri Lanka has introduced technology to preserve Buddhism. Thank you very much.
Up next is the speech by Dr. Martin Seeger on the influence of Pali Tripitaka canon on Buddhist traditions in South Asia. Dr. Martin Seeger is Associate Professor of Thai Studies at the University of Leeds. From 1997 to 2000, he was ordained as a Theravada Buddhist monk in northern Thailand. He earned his PhD in Thai Studies from Hamburg University and is the author of the monograph Gender and the Path to Awakening, Hidden Histories of Nuns in Modern Thai Buddhism, which was published by NIAS Press and Silkworm Books in 2018. We call upon Dr. Seeger.
Venerable members of the Buddhist Sangha, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank the Venerable Bogoda Sela Vimala Nayagatero and Her Excellency Manisha Gunasekara, High Commissioner of Sri Lanka to the UK, for inviting me to the forum today. I feel very honored indeed and am happy to be here today. Let me begin. In particular, in the West, when engaging with the Pali canonical texts, we may often forget that these texts are not just a matter for the eye and the mind to be read and intellectually engaged with, often in an individual and silent way. We may often forget that throughout their long history, these texts have been engaged with and come to life in a variety of ways, both on an individual and communal level. Thus, the Pali canonical texts are much more than a physical object. For a better understanding of the role and significance of the Pali canon in the Buddhist world, the Pali canon needs to be understood not as a static, inert, written collection of texts, but rather, in the words of the Buddhist study scholars Peter Skilling and Adlan Prapot, as a living thing, a store of ideas that has marked many aspects of social life, from ritual to ethics to meditation practice, to literature, art, and education. The ideas and ideologies of the Pali canon pervaded society and the lives of the faithful. In my talk today, I would like to give and reflect on a number of examples from Southeast Asia that exemplify the importance and multiple functions of the Pali canonical texts. This will allow me to show the ways in which the Pali canon has become alive and has impacted and remained central to the life of faithful individuals and Buddhist communities. Following the examples set by Buddhist kings of India, rulers of Southeast Asia not only sponsored Buddhist rehearsals, Sankayana, during which the intactness of the Pali canonical text was established, they also spent large sums for the dissemination of Pali canonical texts. Thus, in the year 1477, for example, Thai king Pachauti Lokarat, king of Chiang Mai, invited several hundred monks to take part in a Buddhist rehearsal with the aim to purify the Pali canonical texts. This rehearsal, which is regarded as the first Thai Buddhist rehearsal, took place in Chiang Mai's monastery, Wat Let Yod, also known as Wat Pothara Mahavihan, and took a year to complete. In the year 1788, Thai king Prabat Somdet Puttayot Fa Dulalok, or better known in the West as Rama I, the first king of the current Jakri dynasty, donated large sums for the copying of the Pali canonical texts, which he had then distributed to all royal monasteries in the country so that these texts could be studied by the monastic community. When he was told, however, that the Pali canon had become distorted, he organized what, according to the Thai way of counting, was the 9th Theravada Buddhist rehearsal. Again, this rehearsal had the objective to cleanse, chamra, the Pali canonical texts, which were then inscribed on palm leaves. King Rama I asked more than 200 monks and more than 30 lay scholars to cleanse the scriptures from distortions over a period of 5 months. The king is said to have attended this scholarly exercise 2 times a day, every day for the entire length of the project. In the second half of the 19th century, King Mindon of Burma had a temple built in Mandalay that contains 729 marble stone tablets on which the Pali canonical texts were inscribed in gold. These tablets are considered to be the biggest book in the world. In 1871, King Mindon was also the patron of the first rehearsal in Burma, in which 2,400 scholar monks participated. Thai king Prabat Somdet Patjunatrom Klau Chau Yuhua, or in the West better known as King Chulalongkorn, or Rama V, sponsored the first ever printed version of the Pali canon. This version, in the Pali language and Thai script, contains 39 of the canonical books and was printed between 1888 and 1893 as part of the celebrations of the 25th anniversary of King Rama V's accession to the throne. 1,000 sets of the Pali Canon were produced. Via the Royal Thai Embassy in London, this edition was sent to over 260 leading institutions across the globe. The complete set of the 45 volumes was then printed during the reign of Rama VII between 1925 and 1930. The exact motivations for organizing and sponsoring these rehearsals and copying of Pali canonical texts may of course vary. What seems to be clear, however, is that it was not only recognized that these texts contain important teachings for the Buddhist practitioners, but also that these acts of preserving and disseminating the Buddha's teaching create a lot of merit. Also, there's ample evidence that shows that the study of the Pali canonical texts was perceived to be crucially important for the health of the state. In the 18th century Thai chronicle Sankiti Vangsa, composed in the Pali language, the importance attached to Buddhist scholarship for the longevity of Buddhism itself is explained with the following words. As long as the study of scriptures, pariyatti, is existent, the religion, satsana, is existent. Even though, as my examples so far have shown, a major concern was the precise preservation of the wording of the Pali canonical texts, the Pali canonical teachings have also been used by the tradition in very creative ways. This is nicely expressed in the words of the enormously influential monastic educator, Prince Patriarch Vachiryan Varorot, a younger half-brother of King Rama V. When the student has understood the Dhammic topics with its characteristics and then learns them as lists, arranged into categories, he will easily gain understanding. He may even be able to employ the lists and categories resourcefully. This is comparable to a student of pharmacy who, having studied the medical textbooks, will be able to prepare a new medical formula effective for usage with different individual patients. As I have investigated in my long-term research on Thai sermon texts and the biographies of influential Thai sermonizers, this kind of approach was widely practiced by both male and female Buddhists. Those who had developed a deep familiarity with the inner systematic structure and narratives of the Pali canonical texts have produced a vast amount of new texts, using the Pali canonical texts both in terms of their formal elements and content as a source for impressive creativity. In this way, over the centuries, a vast amount of valuable Buddhist literature has developed in Southeast Asia. At the same time, the study of Pali canonical texts that included the verbatim memorization of large parts of it may also have transformative aspects for those who have intensively engaged with these texts. The Pali texts, once memorized and thus internalized, may become a part of one's life. Thus, in my research, I try to show how Thai Buddhists have perceived the memorization and reciting of Pali canonical texts as a means of spiritual self-development, very similar to what the scholar monk Analayo observed about textual practices of early Indian Buddhism. Venerable Analayo argued that recitation undertaken for its own sake does seem to function as a means of mental development, bhavana, in a wider sense, and as such could become a tool for progress on the path to liberation. However, I could also give numerous examples that show that when Pali texts are memorized, recited, or chanted, even without understanding the exact meaning of what they say, these texts may still be believed to be efficacious. In fact, in the words of the Thai academic Apichai Pantasen, ordinary Thai Buddhists learn the chanting of texts in Pali so intensively that they are able to recite a number of these texts by heart, but they do not know their meaning. Even monks who chant these texts may not necessarily understand their entire meaning. As the late anthropologist Stanley Timbaya put it once, the Pali texts are meant to be heard, but paradoxically they are not understood by the majority of the congregation. Sheer attendance and hearing without necessarily understanding is efficacious and brings its rewards. In many Thai monastic communities, Pali texts are chanted daily in a group. Monks and often nuns, lay people come together early in the morning and in the afternoon or evening in order to recite Pali texts for up to an hour each time. Monks are also frequently invited to chant Pali texts at special occasions, for example, in order to give blessings for a wedding, the opening of a shop, as part of a magical ritual, as part of the consecration of amulets, at funerals and cremations, or even as part of an exorcism. Newly ordained monks are normally encouraged to learn a number of Pali texts by heart as soon as possible. However, lay people may also chant Pali texts, many of them canonical, on a daily basis on their own at their home, in particular in the evening before they go to bed. Pali texts are seen here as a repository of benevolent, protective, and curative powers, rather than of meaning of Buddhist teachings. In recent years, the so-called Suatmon Kampi, which when translated literally is chanting sacred texts when crossing the years, has become very popular amongst Thai Buddhists. This practice, which began only some 10 years ago, can be seen as a revival of older practices which were abandoned in the 1930s. During the reign of Thai King Rama V from 1868 to 1910, royal ceremonies were held at the end of the old Thai year in April in order to ward off national calamities and to ensure everyone an auspicious entry into the new year. Whilst monks at different locations in Bangkok were chanting a canonical text during the night, 191 guns were fired to frighten away malign influences. In the Pali canonical texts, Attanatiya Sutta, we can read that the Buddha told his monks to learn protective verses that he himself received from the Deva king Vesavanna. He explains that these verses are for your benefit, and through them monks and nuns, male and female lay followers, may dwell guarded, protected, unharmed, and at ease. We can find further texts in the Pali canon that were used in a similar way, either for the protection of an individual or a group. Another aspect of the importance of Pali canonical texts is the experiencing of bodily effects Pali chanting may have on those who listen to it but may not necessarily understand it. The anthropologist Joanna Cook, for example, reports that during chanting Pali texts, Buddhist practitioners may have bodily sensations like goosebumps and shivers or waves of coolness throughout the body. The Pali scholar monk Prasasana Sopon of the Bangkok monastery Wat Somanat describes his feelings when reciting the Buddha's first sermon during a pilgrimage in Benares in northern India as, quotation, "I felt immediately so excited that I was unable to continue with my chanting. The words got stuck in my throat. It was as if the Buddha himself was present." Many of the Buddhist practices in relation to chanting Pali texts seem to presume protective or curative powers, either for the protection or healing of an individual or the warding off of malign forces that threaten a community. We can find numerous passages in the canonical and post-canonical Pali scriptures that seem to be able to serve as a model or legitimation for these practices. The famous canonical text, the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, contains the events of the last days of the Buddha before his death in Kushinara. In the section, the Buddha's final words, the Buddha says that, "Ananda, it may be that you will think the teacher's word has ceased. Now we have no teacher. It should not be seen like that, Ananda. The Dhamma and the Vinaya that I have taught and established will be your teacher after I am gone." The Thai scholar monk Pasomdet Puttakusatan Pa'o Payutto explains this passage to Buddhists nowadays with the following words. The teacher is still with us. He resides in the Pali canon. As described in the Pali texts, the Buddha responded with different means and approaches to his interlocutors depending on their level of spiritual development. Sometimes he gave long and complex instructions. Sometimes he remained silent, refusing to respond to specific questions. But sometimes he may have used his supernatural powers as a means of teaching. As the Thai scholar monk Somdet Paputtakosajan Pa'o Payutto puts it, the meaning of and benefits from the protective Pali texts differ in accordance with the level of spiritual development of the individual, beginning with the general layperson who may want to use them as a source of protective, curative power, up to the level of a fully awakened being, Arahan, who may use these texts as a means to develop joy in the Buddha's teaching. As I have tried to show in my talk, similarly to the Buddha's own wide spectrum of teaching approaches, in the Theravada tradition, the engagement with the Pali canonical texts has had multiple functions in addition to recollecting, preserving, and internalizing Buddhist doctrines. An important function has been to make the Buddha present. In addition, in Southeast Asian Buddhist countries, the Pali canonical texts have also been perceived as being crucially important, not only for the state, but also for the creation of a feeling of community, communal harmony, and unity. In particular, but not only, amongst the monastic community. For a long time in its history, the Pali canonical texts have been experienced as a living thing through hearing, listening to the rhythmic and sonorous Pali chanting of monks, or when the Pali canonical texts entered social and individual life through sermons. To a significant extent, they may have shaped material culture, being vital for a variety of individual and social activities, and enriching the religious lives of many. Whilst having been preserved with a strong and remarkable form of conservatism, the Pali canonical texts have also, and at the same time, been used in creative and flexible ways, many of which have models in the Pali canon itself. Thank you.
He mentioned that the earliest text we have in Sri Lanka is the 13th century. About how many texts do we have between the 13th and the 19th century in Sri Lanka? And when the Pali canon was copied in the late 19th century, the government Oriental College, what sources did they use?
My information on Pali manuscripts actually comes mostly from an article that I read by, I think he's still the current president of the Buddhist Publication Society, a monk Venerable Jnana Tussita, who has written about the history of the Pali manuscript tradition and compiled a certain amount of information. And so it was from him, or an article written by him, that I got the information about the earliest manuscripts being from the 13th century, and they're collected in the Colombo Museum, which Venerable Mahinda mentioned. So I think basically the answer, the quick answer to the question is, as we become closer and closer in time, you know, there are more and more manuscripts from the 18th and 19th century, but the ones that are older are rather sporadic. But I would have to go and check to answer that specific question. You mean they copied?
Yes, they were copied.
Manuscripts.
Manuscripts were copied, and they're now in the Colombo Museum. The date is given as 1870.
Right.
But clearly they must have been copied from something earlier.
Yes. So
I was just wondering whether anyone knew.
I think one of the things to say is that the textual history of Pali manuscripts is exceedingly complicated, because first of all we have the complicated history and unwritten history in the individual countries, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand, Siam, so forth, Cambodia, and so forth. So no one has really fully studied and got to grips with this. So there's the individual countries, and of course these manuscripts went back and forth, as we also heard from in Martin's talk. So I don't think anyone has the full picture of the textual manuscript.
Wondering, in this digital day and age, I only know of Sutta Central as a website, but what else is being done to put the Tripitaka online and make it more accessible?
There are various digital editions of the canon. So actually, the printed Asian editions that I mentioned, so the Buddha Jayanti Tripitaka, you can download every volume of it as a scan. You can download everything, I think, but 2 volumes of the Chulalongkorn 1893 edition. So a lot of these books have been scanned now that and are available for download, as well as there are various searchable digital editions. The PTS edition, you can download it to your computer and search it, and the scans are out of copyright. You can find most of those as well. So lots of things are available. The more perhaps significant project, which is important, is all these manuscripts. There are various projects, both that I'm aware of around in Theravada Buddhist countries, to digitize manuscripts. I mean, people do need to go into the monasteries and catalogue, but also take scans of these manuscripts, because some of them may not last. Some of them are fragile. So that's also, and there are various projects, and that's also important, I think.
Yeah, I may want to add some thoughts. I mean, one idea that is we have to abandon is that we can actually, at least when it comes to Southeast Asia, find in pre-modern times a full set of a canon. You know, these 45 volumes. I mean, these collections in monasteries is quite idiosyncratic. So some may have some texts, and some monasteries may then have vernacular texts, which sometimes are also understood actually to be Pattai-pidok, Tripitaka, but actually are not, you know. So the idea of having a full set is a rather modern idea, and this makes it increasingly very difficult, actually, in addition to the challenges of preservation, you know. So the idea of a complete canon is something that we, of course, as I mentioned in my talk, we find in elite circles, you know, in the rehearsals. But even the rehearsals that I mentioned in Chiang Mai in the 15th century, we don't really know. There's nothing left, you know. We don't really know what was going on there. So the only thing we can do, and we have to do, and we should do that as soon as possible, underscoring what the Venerable Mahinda said, to preserve what is still available, you know, what has survived during this enormously long period of time, survived during the climate, but we will probably not find in any monastery one set of, a full set of the 45 canonical texts. That's a big challenge.
With regard to the question on the Colombo Museum, because the museum is established 1870 or 71, at that time they employed various writers, including, I think, even Munidasa Kumaratunga and few people like that, very elite, and they copied manuscript from other temples, and a lot of detail, you can get it where these manuscripts are available. You know, the Mr. Somadasa, who used to come here, who was in the British Library, he has a brief catalogue of manuscripts in temple libraries. There are 2 volumes, one on British Library and another one on Sri Lankan temples. But also he has 7 volumes published by British Library and Paleolithic Society, giving details about Hugh Neville collection. And there you have the beginning and the end, an important point and relationship to the printed text. But I think the Colombo Museum one, they were copied from the temple libraries, but it badly need work because catalog, even there doesn't exist. I mean, the workers there complain about they don't have a proper librarian, but they don't even maintain the card catalog properly, let alone the manuscripts.
So my question is about Abhidharma. I read in some Tibetan Buddhist texts that Abhidharma was written 200-300 years after Parinirvana. They said it was taught by Buddha, but it was written 200-300 years after Parinirvana. Do you have any comments on that, please?
If we take the Sutta Pitaka, first of all, we have a number of suttas where the Buddha says something in brief and one of his disciples expands it. And the general idea from the perspective of the tradition is, of course, that the Buddha worked out the Abhidharma in the the fourth week after his awakening, but that he didn't immediately teach it, but then he taught it. There's a story told that he taught it to his mother, and then he created a magical body which went on teaching the gods and his mother in the heaven of the 33, and he went to teach the Abhidharma to Sariputta, and Sariputta taught it to his disciples. For me, this story indicates that the Abhidharma is, to some extent, the work of the Buddha's disciples in the way that they tried to systematize his teachings and so forth. So that's how I would understand it. That systematic Abhidharma thought is clearly a development slightly removed from the time of the Buddha. And this becomes clearer if we compare, I mentioned different versions of the Sutta or Sutra Pitaka surviving from the Sarvastivadins and the Dharmakuptakas. If we compare their version of the Sutra Pitaka, we see that it is actually really rather close to the Theravada version. If we compare the Sarvastivadin Abhidharma texts to the Theravada Abhidharma texts, we see much more diversions. There's a lot held in common in terms of principles, but the wording and the way it's set out is very, very different, which suggests to me that the Abhidharma evolved in its final form somewhat later than the sutra texts, that it grew on. Okay.
In that case, when the first council was held, 3 months after Buddha's parinirvana, was Abhidharma known then? Because it is called Tripitaka, that means there are 3 baskets. So if the Abhidharma was added later on, then there should not be 3 baskets, there should be only 2 baskets there.
So if you look at the accounts of the first council in the Vinaya, so the earliest accounts, the Abhidharma is not mentioned by name. They do mention the Martikas and this kind of thing. So I think there are some indications that maybe the Abhidharma, as we know it, was not recited at the first council.
Thank you. This is a question for Dr. Harris. Would it be right in saying or assuming that Sanghamitra was the probably known first woman ambassador diplomat? And what we have so far heard about the role men have played in preserving the Tripitaka, are there any examples of women who have played a role in the history of Buddhism of preserving and promoting the Tripitaka?
Well, thank you for that question. I mean, I haven't thought of Venerable Sanghamitra in that light, but maybe. Though we don't know if there were other nuns who were sent to other countries by Ashoka, or the nuns that arrived, yes, in Myanmar. I mean, I can remember one visit to Shan State several years ago when I was taken to a place in Shan State where they were convinced that, yes, the Ashoka's missionaries had been. Were there women there? I don't know. I'd like to think there were, but maybe not. I think Mahinda gave a very good example of a woman with the Hevatarana collection, the husband-wife team, and the woman being very active in preserving, and and Mahinda will say something about that. Yes, I think some stories of women have been edited out of the whole story of the preservation of the Tripitaka. I'm not an expert on that, but I think it's a general truth, I think, about how religion is spoken about, that sometimes the stories of women are edited out. But I think there have been, particularly in 19th century Sri Lanka, there were certainly strong women who were communicating the message of the Tripitaka, theosophists who came to Sri Lanka and did work on this. So I think there have been strong women, but Mahinda will say something more about.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think the photo is there. If you go there, in the library, even on the top of the door, you can see the photo. This lady is amazing. I think she was widowed when she was 25. So she took away the husband project, and I think none of them would have come without her, because she gave all her resources to the text. And also, once she died in 1982, she gave the whole state for publication. I think a remarkable lady, I think, kind of, what widows do when the husbands die. When they were very young, they started this project, even the husband would have been even 20, 25, undertaking this project and seen through. It's a remarkable woman. I think there may be some manuscripts in these temple collections. Some of the manuscripts may have been copied by women, as a meritorious activity. But I think we need to study those areas. We haven't approached it from that angle.
May I also add, when you asked your question, the first name that came into my mind is actually, the canonical book, Tripitaka, which is, according to Theravada tradition, was actually recited not by a male monastic, but by a female lay follower, Kuchuttara. So the whole book, and it belongs to one of the oldest and certainly a very interesting collection of very important texts in the Kuttaka Nikaya. And this is by the tradition believed to have been recited by this lay woman. And then, of course, you, as Elizabeth Harris already mentioned, you have the Theravada that may actually very well be autobiographical texts by monastic arahan, female fully enlightened beings reciting these texts. And then there's, of course, the Theravada, which also contains material that seems to go back to female authorship. And this seems to be quite unique in the history of female authorship. I'm not 100% sure, but it seems to me that it may very well be possible that in the Theravada tradition we may have the earliest evidence for female autobiographical writing, which makes it quite astonishing. And then also, I wanted to add a little bit from Thailand. We do have in the late 19th century and early 20th century, in fact, very many women who have been very important in creating new texts, as I mentioned in my presentation. These women tended not to publish with their name. More often they decided to publish their sermons anonymously. In one case, it was the reason why a very important text in Thailand, Tamanu Tamapatipati, was then actually put into the mouth of a monk later on, because the woman who published it decided to do so anonymously. So again, we need to do more research, but it seems to me that women have been playing significant roles in the transmission and interpretation and application of these texts.
Just one word. I think Hema Gurutilaka in Sri Lanka has done some work on the women who have been forgotten within the history of Buddhism in Asia. That has been work done on this.
7 blind people were asked to explain about the elephant, and they went there and touched the elephant and they explained the elephant in different ways. Likewise, sometimes when we read different translations, we can see the different ways they have translated. For instance, dukkha, the word has been translated into various words, even in, for instance, dukkha is translated in insecurity, suffering. Nowadays they use the word distress. Likewise, also, ekayano bhikkhave ayam maggo. Some people have translated this is the only way. Sometimes they have translated, some scholars, this is the direct path. This way, we have been given different translations, like Karl Amos had doubts. Listening to different teachers, they were terribly doubtful about what was the truth. Likewise, I'm a little bit doubtful about reading so many translations.
I think you raise a very interesting question. I mean, I think with a word like dukkha, there is clearly no right translation. It's a kind of concept that is powerful, has a great deal of depth, and resonance and different kind of connotations, so that there is no one translation of the term when you're trying to translate into English or other European languages. Though, you know, it's a familiar concept that goes beyond Buddhism in Indian religious tradition. It's a word, the concept of dukkha is found in the Yoga Sutras and so forth in a very similar way to the Buddhist way. So there, in a way, you have to read and get a feel for what dukkha means and what it refers to. And the English translation, sometimes it can help, sometimes it can mislead. I think the ekayana of Maggo is a slightly different case in my view. I think there, you know, direct or only, there we actually have to investigate how the word ekayana is used in other Pali texts to try and come up with what is likely to be the most likely meaning. So in one sutta, I can't remember, the word ekayana or maggo is used to refer to a path that leads to a pit of coals, in a simile, in an image. And so from that context, it seems to me that it's very clear in that context that the expression ekayana maggo does not mean the only path. It means that it's a path that goes only in one direction to one place. And so when we look at the usage in other passages, we can think, well, maybe actually the only path is actually an incorrect translation. And I would argue that that translation is actually incorrect in the context of the Satipatthana Sutta, that it wasn't being used in that sense. But other scholars may disagree with me, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much, audience, for asking those thought-provoking questions, and thank you very much, the panel, for answering their questions. The last item is the vote of thanks by Mr. Sugishwara Gunaratna, Deputy High Commissioner of Sri Lanka to the UK. He has been very busy traveling between the High Commission and the Vihara, arranging all that. I would like to say, I'm not praising you right to your face, you are like the string that runs through the flowers that makes the garland. We see the garland and then we don't see the string. Right? Thank you. I call upon you to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of the High Commissioner and the High Commission.
Venerable Bogoda Silawimala Nayakathero, Venerable members of the Mahasangha, Your Excellency Manisha Gunasekara, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have been taken on a fascinating journey today, a fascinating journey into the heart and some of the contents of one of the oldest texts available to mankind. In many ways, the history of countries such as Sri Lanka, also Thailand, Myanmar and others have been based on the protection, the propagation and the preservation of this ancient text, which is also the primary source material for the teaching of perhaps the greatest human being to traverse this planet. So we have a number of people we would like to thank today, starting with the Venerable Bogoda Silawimala Nayakathero, whose ready acceptance of our proposal to host this forum, and without whose guidance this would not have been a reality. The Anagarika Dharmapala Trust, who have very committedly and unwaveringly helped us in organizing this forum. Our speakers, Professor Rupert Gethin, Dr. Elizabeth Harris, Professor Venerable Digalle Mahindathero, and Dr. Martin Seeger, for their ready acceptance to speak today and for the fascinating insight they have provided us into why the Tripitaka should be a heritage of all of mankind. We also like to thank His Excellency Pisanu Suwanajata, Ambassador of Thailand, and Madam Suwanajata, Kiau Swa Min, His Excellency the Ambassador of the Republic of the Union of Myanmar, and also the Pakistan High Commissioner, His Excellency Mohammad Nafis Zakaria, for gracing the occasion here today, and also the High Commissioner of Bangladesh, Her Excellency Saida Muna Tasnim, for sending a representative, as she had accepted very readily to be here today with us, but yesterday she informed us that her child was sick, and of course, as a mother, that should gain prerogative. Well, we also would like to thank our MC and moderator today, Venerable Dedunupiti Upananda Thero, for guiding us in a very wise, erudite, and also a timely manner through the discussion. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, all of you, for being here today and asking some very poignant questions that provided a deeper insight to all of us. Thank you for being here, and may the Triple Gem bless you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.